finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right, welcome back to BS Free MD. This is a real interesting special episode. I had the opportunity to speak at an event with Bigtree. If you don't know who he is, he's a former producer of the Doctors TV show and has been really big in the anti-vaccine movement with regards to, he has his own show, The Live Wire. And he did an interesting talk about what would I tell somebody who was newly pregnant on vaccinating their kid. So this is his kind of treatsy. How he came to this whole vaccine world was he's a TV producer, and he got a lead that there was, potential scuttlebutt going on in the vaccine world at the CDC. He looked into it. He's like, this is the greatest show in the world to produce, and was essentially shut down because, of course, they're sponsored by pharma. So the talk is great. If you are a 100% pro-vax person, you should absolutely listen to this. People say, well, what's your opinion? My opinion is I think vaccines work. Whether they work the way we want them to work and whether they cause more harm than good, I don't know what the answer to that is, because that has not been studied. So the question really is not, does the Haemophilus influenza vaccine prevent Haemophilus influenza? I think it does. I've seen that in my actual practice. Diseases that used to exist 25 years ago don't seem to, and it seems that the vaccine is the thing that did it. Does it cause more harm than good, or more good than harm? We don't know, because that has not been studied. And as a 30-plus year physician in allopathic medicine, that alone to me seems like an absolute scandal. Just that. They've never studied the combination of how many viruses, attenuated virus vaccines you can give to a baby. Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 10? It's just the more the merrier. It's 44 bottles of beer on the wall. What's better than 44 beers? 45 beers. So that part is, I 100% agree with. I think he makes some excellent arguments. I agree with most of them at this point, which I would have never said in a million years, even 4 years ago. So I think this is going to be really eye-opening for a lot of people. And, it might piss off a lot of people, but, not like we haven't done that before. What did you think, May?
His talk, his evidence, the information he provided, as he says, was more information than most physicians know about vaccines. And that was true in my case. A lot of the background, the fact that they've never actually been studied at all.
Well, they've never been studied against inert placebos,
Right.
And they've never been studied of, like, when you say vaccines have been studied, yes, they've been studied, but have they been studied where you take a group of kids that are vaccinated and a group of kids that are unvaccinated and then follow them for 5 or 10 years and see what happens? No.
And the study, wasn't it only 2 weeks long?
No, some of them, the side effect follow-up was only like 5 days to 14 days to whatever. Yeah. So it's very bizarre.
So I don't even really call that a study. So that's why I said not really studied at all, because it's a very limited, one-sided crap study that they've used to vaccinate kids with for years. And we were all on board thinking, blindly believing that there was more data behind this. So as he presents the information and the case histories of some of these families and what has happened, as well as some of the testimony by some of the physicians and both sides, and it's caught some of the stuff that's caught on video/audio behind the scenes will blow your mind, as these physicians didn't know that they were being recorded. And So very eye-opening piece, either side of the aisle, whether you're pro or vaccine or really against it or in between. It's something that everyone should listen to and make your own decisions from. And
Yeah.
it should open up your mind.
Yeah. Open up your mind.
Versus, we're not looking to change it.
No,
we just want you to like be aware.
Be aware. I mean, and it's so funny because you ask doctors, you're just like, well, this needs to be studied with inert placebos where you have a group of kids that are vaccinated versus a group of kids that are not vaccinated. Well, we can't do that because we'd have a bajillion cases of measles and they'd all die. And I go, well, you don't know that because that's never been studied. So saying that is a article of faith and a circular argument. We can't do that. Everyone will die. Well, no, they did. Everyone didn't die in 1760. Did more people die of infectious disease? Yes, but they were also taking a dump on their front porch.
I'm thinking back to our childhood. How many kids did you know? I mean, we've been around the bend on this a whole bunch of times.
Yeah,
people died. So it's fear porn. But anyway,
mostly ignorant fear porn. If you go to your doctor's office and say, show me the studies, show me the randomized controlled trials against inert placebos,
the CDC has it.
They'll just they don't know because we were those people and we didn't know. And we just assumed by articles of faith that it was okay. Now we're asking the questions. Do I have a 100? I think in certain situations, in certain countries, in certain places with certain vaccines, they're absolutely life-changing. Dell would disagree with that. I think there's a place for this. Whether it's the vaccines we use in North America to vaccinate every single child, that I don't know because it hasn't been studied. That's the truth.
So this is a great summation of the story and was well presented. So we think you will enjoy it.
Buckle up. The roller coaster's leaving the station, kids.
It's always amazing to follow someone with that much passion. And I get it. I mean, you have to understand when you go around, and I speak to lots of people, and you ask yourself, I mean, do they really understand what's going on here? Do you really get it? Because you look out in these audiences and everyone's going, yeah, but you're still going home and you're taking your statin drugs or this. I'm just going to buy a little bit of medicine that I'm going to, deal with. I was just in Geneva, Switzerland about a month ago, I guess now, protesting the WHO treaty. And we had a symposium with a lot of brilliant people from around the world. And one of the questions they posed to us is, what would be your message to people on how to transform the medical system? And, everybody had ideas on how we're going to use new energy, medicine, healing systems, and all this. But it just kept coming back around to the fact that, but you have a total juggernaut right now with so much funding going into the system that exists right now, controlling it, like how many hospitals are going to move over. And we have these giant malls. And I just finally said, I think that what I would say to people is this: live your life like there are no doctors. And what I mean by that is, one of the stories that keeps coming to the high wire that, my team will say, oh, there's another person that can't get their liver transplant or their kidney transplant because they won't take the vaccine. And I mean, not to judge those people, but I was like, I hate that story. I don't like that story because what that story says is for some reason you've lived your life a certain way that you've now got your body shutting down. And so now you want the hospital to save you. You want that corrupt medical system to save you, but you just don't want to take one of the products that you don't like. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, either you're going to play by their rules and play in their game or you're not. And let me be really clear about this, because before I even get started here, the work that I've done since I put out Vax and what Ben is doing and what many in the medical freedom space are doing, we're waging war against the medical system. We're calling them out. We're letting them know that they're liars and they're thieves and they're criminals and they're murderers. So I have news for you. When you use language like that, they're not going to go, hey, Del, come on in for your surgery. We can't wait to have you. You're not going to get it in the middle. And by the way, there is a future in medicine that's coming that's going to be so spectacular and dynamic, and many of you have access to some of the things that are coming. But that medical system that's going to integrate it probably will not happen, certainly not in the next 5 to 10 years. And for most of us in this room, that means our health is going to be going through different scenarios, and that system's not going to be there for us. So Ben is right. Take your life very seriously now. Take your health very seriously right now, because unless you want to play the game of their system, well, when someone will call me and say, what is it I have to look for when I'm going in, that they're going to sneak a vaccine? I was like, why are you going in? What's happening? Why are you making that decision? Yeah, like, well, I'm afraid that when I'm under, they might vaccinate you. That'd be like the least of the problems you're going to have once you've gone in. But that's just to back up what Ben was talking about. I'm going to sort of lay out, as best I can, Vax came out in 2016, so about the last 7 or 8 years of my life, and a goal to try and expose this system as I discovered it. And I've been calling, I've been working on the ultimate argument. If I was going to be in front of a courtroom on the ultimate argument against vaccinations, this is it. I tweaked it a little bit because I got a text from a really good friend, a young guy that I've mentored for many years. We've made television shows together and things. I'm always giving him advice. And many of you know the story. Right before I was finished with Vax, I had a bunch of producer friends and people from all over Hollywood to come and watch it just to get some last minute notes. And he was one of the people that gave me notes. And I remember him saying, the film was really dynamic. I mean, it's like super interesting. It's like, I'm not sure like I buy it, I still believe in vaccines, but it's going to be really effective. So he texted me yesterday and said, hey, Del, I was wondering if you could find some time to maybe talk to my wife. They just got married. I wasn't able to make it to his wedding because of all the things I had going on a few months ago. But he's like, we're due in October, and I was wondering if maybe you could really talk to her about vaccinations because she really wants to vaccinate our kid. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then the next text came in. And by the way, if I haven't said it yet, you were right and I was wrong. And I just thought, and he's like, if that means anything to you, I said, the only thing that means anything to me is if I save your kid. That's the only thing I care about right now. And so I sort of tweaked this PowerPoint as though I'm going to sit with him and his wife and hope that somehow I can get through to her. Now, the secret to what I've done really with the high wire is that mostly I let them say it for us. I mean, if you watch the high wire, it's not just my opinion. We're showing you what they've admitted from the beginning, whether it's the FDA's emergency use authorization saying that they don't know whether it's going to stop transmission or all the issues that are there. But my favorite is when they get on these pesky little things we have now in the modern world, which is called a video camera. I love how many things these people have said in front of video cameras and somehow expect us to all forget. One of the most amazing things about the COVID vaccine, I know you've all dealt with this, is you'll say to a friend, you have to admit, right? I told you the vaccines don't stop transmission. You're on like shot number 9 now. And how many have heard your friends say, oh no, they never said it was going to stop transmission. It was only designed to like take away your disease. Raise your hand if you've heard that line. Like they've never said it, right? I was like, what are you talking about? It's exactly what they said it was going to do.
Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Getting vaccinated and getting a booster shot when eligible can save your life and protect you and your family and friends from getting seriously ill and spreading infection.
What do you think the probability is? 80%?
Personally, I think it's 100%. I think that there's a reduction in transmission.
Right. Essentially, vaccines block you from getting and giving the virus.
If enough people get vaccinated, it actually halts transmission.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations. We have all the vaccines we need. We just need our people to take it. A, for their own protection, for the protection of their family, but also to break the chain of transmission. You want to be a dead end to the virus. So when the virus gets to you, you stop it. You don't allow it to use you as the stepping stone to the next person.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
I carry that last clip on my cell phone just in case I ever run into Rachel Maddow. I gotta be like, hold on a second. You did say this, right? You totally said this, right? Have you gotten booster shot number 9? I mean, it's outrageous that they're able to change the narrative, right? It's part of what we have to watch is this ability through repetition to change the history that we all lived through. And that's what they do. They just get on television and say all the time, no, it was always, it was just transmission. We said it was going to, we didn't say it's transmission, it was going to stop the disease, which, by the way, if you've been watching the High Wire, we called all of this out as it was happening. We told you that the FDA said they had no idea whether the vaccination was going to stop transmission or not, even though that day on television, they were saying 95% effective. Most of these people will still get on televisions and say that Judy Mikovits and I are still spreading misinformation. I mean, it's amazing to me that we live in a world that even when you've won, it doesn't matter. You're still a conspiracy theorist and you're still, spreading misinformation. What was amazing, though, and I'm going to take you through it, this is the evidence that we now have.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk.
That line, moving at the speed of science, should live in infamy. I will do my best to make sure that it does, because nothing could be more perfectly stated when we think of modern science. Rushing science, we had to move at the speed of science. Now, here's what amazes me about this statement. I want you to think about it. I mean, maybe it wasn't so bad in Florida. It wasn't too bad in Texas either. But if you lived in California, where I came from in Hollywood, most of my friends are calling like Dell. They're making me test twice a day. I got a test in the morning. They ran this thing up my nose. And then after I go to lunch, I come back and they ran it back up my nose. And kids all over this country, preschoolers, were having these things rammed up there. I mean, can you imagine that's done to them, like, psychically? I mean, the rest of their lives, adults, like, ramming things up their nose, whether they like it or not, sometimes once a week or every day. There were jobs many of you had. You couldn't go to work at least once a week. They had to ram this thing up your nose. And what Janine Smalley is telling us here is something absolutely amazing. She's the head of the Pfizer trials, and what she's basically saying to us is that if you were a person that didn't like things rammed up your nose and didn't want to be tested, there was one place in the United States of America you would be safe, where that wouldn't happen to you. You know where it was? If you were a test subject in the trials for the COVID vaccine. I mean, this thing's supposed to be designed to stop us from being asymptomatic carriers. Let's not forget this. Stopping transmission was the entire point. This is the first virus ever that they just kept saying the danger is you don't know you have it, right? It's spreading because so many people don't know they have it, which was amazing to me that then what they said, well, it didn't stop transmission, it reduced your disease. You mean less than zero? I thought the whole point was no one knew they had the damn thing. So suddenly what this does is it keeps you from having it or feeling it. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. But if you didn't want to be tested, they did no testing. What's the excuse of that? If you're trying to see if the vaccine works, you have 45,000 people in, I think it was Pfizer's, and like 35,000 Moderna's or vice versa. Half of them get the vaccine, the other half are getting a saline placebo, which only existed, by the way, because my nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network, threatened to sue the FDA. We said, hold on a second, you're about to use a meningococcal vaccine as your placebo. That is not a placebo. We will call it out to the world. And they stopped down the phase 3 trials, and 4 days later came back and said, we changed how we're doing it. We're going to add a saline placebo. It only lasted a couple of weeks, but it was a little bit of a coup. We got in there for just a moment. All right, so they're doing the studies. They test the vaccine against the placebo. They rush it out in the market. The thing doesn't end up stopping transmission, doesn't seem to do anything. And here's what we now know. The effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccine over 13 months, these are just old, the Lancet, this is all coming out, September 22. This is what was amazing about it. Not only did it not stop transmission, our results were similar to the UK study, albeit with even more rapidly waning effectiveness. Somewhat implausibly, we even observed a negative vaccine efficacy against Omicron infection from week 14, indicating that the vaccinated individuals experienced a higher risk of infection than those unvaccinated. So it made you more likely to get infected. And people are still on like number 5, number 6, number 7. I mean, if one makes you more likely to get infected, what is 9 of these things doing to you? It goes on. Here was the graph. And this still holds true, by the way, in every study we're looking at. You can see it's effective for like day 1 and 2, day 5. I mean, these are weeks, 5, 10 weeks, and then right at about 14 weeks, it hits the 0 point. And from every moment after that, you are now at a higher risk of getting infected if you got vaccinated. And still, Paul Offit and, Peter Hotez, I don't know if you saw my show this week, he's calling for NATO to get involved. They need Homeland Security has got to stop people like me from spreading misinformation like the fact that your vaccine is a total disaster. All right, so that's COVID. We know that we now have polls that are showing 1 in 4 Americans think they know someone that died from COVID-19 vaccines, a huge number. About 48, I think, percent said that they thought it was possible the COVID vaccine does kill people. So we turned the corner with COVID. And let me be really clear about this. We had been working at the high wire with the Informed Consent Action Network. We had been suing the government of the United States since the end of 2016 with the great work of Aaron Seary, my attorney. We've been, one against the FDA, the CDC, Health and Human Services, the National Institutes of Health. We're the most successful nonprofit suing the government over health issues ever. And so when COVID was coming along, and I'd already been saying to audiences, I might have even said it here at one point, they're going to have a pandemic. They're going to have to do something to get you to believe you need to be forced vaccinated because they're spending way too much money. Now, I was saying all along, the pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful lobby in Washington. It's outspending oil and gas 2 to 1. For every dollar oil and gas buys your politicians, pharma is paying twice that to put all of your politicians in office. And I was saying, what do you think they're buying for that? I mean, do you see anything that they're gaining? Are they going to get their money back on going after that 3% of the unvaccinated kids from like the children of hippies? No. They're coming after you. I said it before the COVID came along. I said, they're coming after you. You are their future. And by the way, anyone that tells you that vaccines don't make money are in the dark ages. They're the most profitable product. Let me explain really quickly the genius of vaccination. just from a marketing perspective. And if you are an entrepreneur, a business person, try to wrap your head around this because it's fantastic. Now let's look at COVID. COVID ultimately has a death rate of about 0.35%, okay, across the world. That includes all of the elderly people over the age of about 70 that had 2, 3, 4 comorbidities that had about a 3% death rate. And it goes all the way to your under 21-year-olds that had a 0.0002% death rate. No young person should have gotten this vaccine. It was only a risk. They had no risk from the virus. So if the death rate is 0.35% across the world, think about this. You're in industry. We could make a drug, let's say like ivermectin, but maybe one you can charge for. It was still on patent or something. Paxlovid. Now, we can make Paxlovid for 0.35% of the population. We'll make some money. But what about this other category? Vaccines. Now, the thing about a vaccine is it's not for 0.35% of those that are going to die that we could cure. See, the genius of this is that, no, everybody else has to take it to protect the 0.35% that can't. So are you going to make a product, invest in a product that is sold to 0.3% of the population, or the one that's for 99.7% of the population? And they all have to take it in order for it to work. And if it doesn't work great, there's a booster shot. You sell 2 of them, or 3 of them, or 5 of them. Do you have any idea why they know that they're going to continue to make hundreds of billions of dollars off of vaccinations? There's no drug like it. And whether you want to get politically involved or not, the one thing Donald Trump did make sure is that this industry got hundreds of billions of dollars of our tax money to make a product that would never work so that they could have even more money and buy even more of your politicians. Thank you very much. Very helpful. All right, but here's what I really want to get into, because this is where the conversation has gone. Finally, probably most of you in this room already knew this. I hope some of you brought friends to say, hey, if you're questioning, come along and take a look at this. But here's the question now. All right, I get it. The COVID vaccine sucks. But the rest of the vaccines are okay, right? And by the way, if you're watching the High Wire, it was amazing. I remember the first time Dr. Peter McCullough came on our show, and I was psyched he was there. It was amazing. Literally the leading heart doctor in the world, the most published heart doctor in the world, came out everywhere and said, this vaccine is causing heart disease. It's causing myocarditis, pericarditis. I'm convinced no one should be taking it. It should be off the market. And they immediately said he's a loon. He's crazy. Oh, he's one of those anti-vaxxers. Really? Like the leading heart doctor in the world is now suddenly an anti-vaxxer. But when he came on the show, you know, he talked about the COVID vaccine afterwards. I was like, I'd really like you to look at our research on the other vaccines. I swear to God this happened. He's like, I don't really want to get into that. I still believe in the childhood vaccine program, but I'm really going to do my best to stop the COVID vaccine. I said, well, take our book. This is the interaction I've had with Health and Human Services. It has hyperlinks. You can take a look at it. Now, I'm not sure if that's what did it, because I'm sure many others like me talk to him. But if you see him now, he's like, do not go near a single childhood vaccine. This is the craziest thing that's ever happened in medicine. And lots of great scientists and doctors are coming to that determination. Not because they've lost their mind. One who I won't name is still thinking about coming forward. I was in England, and I don't know if you saw when I was, I was emceeing the event, the Better Way conference there, and Geert Vanden Bosch locked up with me. I was supposed to just be facilitating this panel, but then he said, the childhood vaccine program's great. It's just the COVID vaccine. I was like, whoa. I can't. No one that knows me will ever let me talk to them again if I don't stop you there. And we kind of locked up. I said, that's not true. Afterwards, the scientist pulled me aside and said, Del, you're really not doing yourself any, services here. You got so many great people coming out against the COVID vaccine. Leave the childhood vaccine program alone. It's really been well tested. It's not the same thing. And when you conflate those two, it makes you seem like you're crazy. And I said, you're a really smart person, And I know that you're also someone that won't be able to stop investigating. So I'll tell you, you're wrong. You'll eventually figure that out. Trust me, this is the worst product ever made. About 6 months ago, I was at an event. He came up to me and said, and this is like a year and a half later, Del, this isn't easy for me, but I have to apologize. I was like, oh, for what? And he was like, well, remember when you told me, we locked up over the childhood vaccine program? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, you were right. You were right, and I was wrong. And he's like, now let me be clear. He's like, I knew there was vaccine injury. I knew there was no such thing as a product that doesn't hurt some people. But what I didn't know and still cannot believe after looking as deeply as I have into it, there's no science at all. It doesn't exist. That's what I'm going to prove to you right now, and it's what we've spent since the end of 2016 proving in every way that we could. Before COVID ever came along, we brought a lawsuit against this whooping cough, especially this ad. I don't know if you remember it. Basically, it was in Reader's Digest and on the television. It was really aimed at grandparents for if there's a new baby in the family, and they would be like, you want to hold the baby? And grandma would pick up the baby and then turn into Big Bad Wolf. Well, this is the whole idea that you could be a carrier, of pertussis, whooping cough, and therefore put that baby at risk. So you've got to go out and get your Tdap vaccine, the adult version, tetanus, diphtheria, and acellular pertussis. Well, we challenged it in court and said this is absolutely false advertising, because the opposite is actually true. How do we know that? We know that because of multiple studies that have been done. This is Boston University, pretty good university, I've heard. Resurgence of whooping cough may owe to vaccines' inability to prevent infections. What? And this is before COVID, remember? We were already fighting this. September 21st, 2017. Look at this. This paragraph contains everything you need to understand about the vaccine program. This disease is back because we didn't really understand how our immune defenses against whooping cough worked, and did not understand how the vaccines needed to work to prevent it, said Christopher J. Gill, Associate Professor of Global Health and lead author of the article. Instead, we layered assumptions upon assumptions and now find ourselves in the uncomfortable position of admitting that we may have made some crucial errors. This is definitely not where we thought we'd be in 2017. We don't know how the immune system works. We don't know how vaccines work. This is true. When I was at CBS and started investigating for Vaxxed, you would be shocked. With all the confidence they bring to the news, they have no idea how your immune system actually works. One day, a guy named Edward Jenner saw a couple of milkmaids. This is literally how the story goes. They weren't getting smallpox, and he noticed that there's big pustules on the ass of this cow, and he thought, maybe because they're coming in contact with cowpox, it's protecting them from smallpox. So he slit the arm of his child open, and his neighbor's kid grabbed some of that pus and slapped it right in there. The neighbor's kid turned out all right. What's amazing about this story, the father of the vaccine program, Edward Jenner, they describe that child as he grows older as retarded, handicapped, sickly, and dies at, 21 years old, I believe it is? Died at 21. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what retarded was, containing there, but there is a chance that that may be your first autistic person in the world. First vaccination, and first totally unhealthy kid that has all sorts of neurological development disorders and ends up dying at 21. And since then, we've just been injecting viruses and bacteria. How about a little bit of mercury? How about a little aluminum? Let's see what that does. I don't know. It seemed to work. Moving on. Assumptions upon assumptions. If that wasn't bad enough, look at this article. And this is what's really disturbing. The 120-year odyssey of pertussis and pertussis vaccines, mistakes made and implications for the future. This is the Journal of Pediatric Infection. Because of linked epitope suppression, all children who were primed by DTaP vaccines will be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetimes. And there's no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. 2017, we realize, oh my God, this thing is not stopping transmission. It doesn't work. They're spreading it with all their classmates. It's on the loose across America. 2 years later, even worse, everyone that got this vaccine is just going to get sick over and over and over again, just like COVID vaccine. You now have negative vaccine efficacy. Because you took the vaccine, your body cannot fight this disease any longer, and it's going to catch it every single time it comes in contact. So now let's think of the commercial. Let's think of the big bad wolf. Who's actually the big bad wolf? When we want our grandparents to, like, granted, little baby here, probably don't want pertussis coming in the house if we can avoid it. Now, what would you rather? Grandma and grandpa get the vaccine, and the only thing it does is hide their symptoms. They don't know that they've got pertussis. So they're going to come over feeling great, hold your baby, hug your baby, and now we have a problem. Whereas if they don't get the vaccine, and for some reason their nearly lifetime immunity from the last time they caught it has like maybe gone away, they're going to call you and say, hey, we're not going to visit the baby. You got a little bit of a cough today. We're not feeling so hot, so we're going to stay home. We have an alarm system, this great thing in our body telling us right now, we're not feeling so hot. So we're going to stay away from the baby. Which is more dangerous? Well, that argument in court's going pretty good. See if you can find a big bad wolf advertisement anywhere. You won't. But think about this. They know this. And they're still giving your kid about 5 of these things before they're even 10 years old. What is going on? Why don't you go back to the drawing boards? Why don't we just pull this vaccine? What is wrong with these people? All right, I'm going to get into the really heated space here. The measles outbreak. I was in New York during a measles outbreak. I love this moment. There's like 6 news cameras around me, and everyone's firing questions at me, and I was just answering as best I could. I was there to speak to the Hasidic Jewish community that weren't vaccinating. And what was amazing is they had a huge measles outbreak. But the part the news never told you about was because they were all going over to each other's houses and sharing lollipops because they were trying to catch it, because the government was telling them they weren't going to go to synagogue if they weren't immune, and they weren't going to take the vaccine. So they started their own outbreak on purpose, the way we used to all do it, like, the normal way. So I was there, and this is the big question that comes up. What about measles? Del, you're going to get people killed. Brandy Zarazny, I think, from NBC comes up and lays the same question on me every time. Comes up to me, and she's always like, you're going to get people killed with measles. My favorite thing to say every time a reporter does that is like, really? How are you here? What do you mean? I mean, how are you standing here asking me this question? I don't understand what you're talking about. I was like, well, measles, you do know measles is like the most infectious disease we know of. Like everyone that comes in contact with it catches it, right? Yeah, right. Okay, so if it's deadly, how are you here? How are any of us here? All of our grandparents caught this thing, and there's billions of us all over this planet. So how deadly was it? I actually know those numbers, and I'm about to share some of them with you now, but let's go over the Disneyland outbreak, because this is why SB 277 was started. We got to take away your right to just choose whether you're going to vaccinate. We're going to force vaccinate everybody because the deadly measles outbreak at Disneyland. Oh, my God. This literally changed everything. Senator Richard Pan loved this. Okay, again, not my science. Let me just share what the Department of Health found when they looked into this thing. All right, the vaccination status of the measles outbreak. Of the, 82 that were looked at, 25 of them, so 31% were vaccinated. 31% of them were vaccinated. They're trying to tell us the reason this outbreak happened was of all the unvaccinated kids. But hold on a second, 31% had vaccine failure. And look at the next category, 49 of them, 38% of the 131 cases did not have immunization records, but we know that 48 out of the 49 were adults. Every adult has had their MMR vaccine if they're living in this country for the most part, unless they're one of those crazy anti-vaxxers. So you have to assume, if not all, probably 40 of them were vaccinated. So we have to imagine that at least 50% of these cases happened because the vaccine didn't work at all. You'll never hear that story. Majority of cases were adults. 53% were adults. I thought you said the children caused this thing. Half of them are adults, so we have a much bigger problem than unvaccinated 3-year-olds in their preschool. Gets even better. 30% of the cases had vaccine strain measles, meaning they got measles from the vaccine. So now where are we at in this story? We're running around with our hair on fire because a couple of hundred people got measles. 30% of them got it from the vaccine. About 50% of them had the vaccine and it didn't work. And that's measles. And when we talk about the death rate, this is what used to be the CDC, U.S. Department of Health. 1960, that's about 1 year before you have an MMR vaccine even viable. I think maybe 62 is when it actually came out. That's 0.2 is the death rate, 0.2 people per 100,000. Meaning the death rate in 1960 from measles in the United States of America was 1 in 500,000 people would die. That is a zero. That's a zero. So we made a product for an issue that wasn't an issue. In fact, if you go back and look at the literature, most of the people, there was a divide, about half of the immunologists and vaccinologists or all the people in immune discussions were saying, we should not make this vaccine. This is dangerous as hell because this is basically an inert childhood illness. It does not cause death, but it's highly infectious. And the concern, they said, is if we pressure this virus with a vaccine and we make it more deadly but don't get rid of it, then we've caused a bigger problem than we have. The last thing we want is for measles to be deadly. But they went ahead and did it anyway. And I won't get into the whole Samoa measles outbreak, but there are real questions. There was a strain coming out of the Ukraine that started evading vaccination. And it does appear to be more deadly. And so when people tell you, well, we eradicated measles. No, you haven't. We eradicated polio. No, you haven't. Polio is now being tested in the water systems in New York. It's spreading all across, the Far East and Africa and places where they're using vaccinations. Once again, vaccine strain measles. And here's a little tidbit. Just like COVID and just like pertussis, our polio vaccine does not stop infection and transmission. It just stops your symptoms. So there's a chance we're all starting to spread polio right now in this country, and who knows what's going to happen from that. I guarantee you the CDC is terrified. They'll never tell you this is happening in the news, but it is. All right, so how did we get here? If you go to a website, the FDA's website, and it says the safety of vaccines. Vaccines undergo rigorous and extensive testing to determine their safety and effectiveness. Highly trained scientists and medical personnel at FDA carefully review all the information in a marketing application before a vaccine can be approved for use by the public. That's true. For drugs, not necessarily for vaccines. Take a look on the left. This is what I'm talking when they say vaccines don't make any money. Pfizer's top 5 selling drugs of all times. Enbrel, 6.6 years. And this is the safety review, right? Had a 6.6 year review period and used a placebo. I believe it's an injectable anyway. Sugar pill for pills and saline for injectables. Eliquis, 7.4 year safety trial using a placebo. PCV13, 1.5 year, and the control was a PCV7. In fact, look at that. You remember that, what was it, Sesame Street? One of these things is not like the other. One of them's not getting tested for like any time whatsoever, and one of them's not using a real placebo. Guess what? It's a vaccine. The rest are drugs. Drugs have long-term safety trials using a placebo group. One group got the drug, other group got a placebo, but not the vaccines. In fact, look over here. The vaccines in the first 6 months of life. Hep B, 5-day safety trial, no placebo. IPV, 3-day safety trial, no placebo. Hib, 3-day safety trial. Another Hib vaccine was the placebo in that one. Look, it did better than our last Hib vaccine. It's safe. DTaP, 28 days. And they used DTP. DTP was the reason we started the 1986 Act. So many people were being injured and killed by that vaccine that they decided to blackmail the government and say, if you don't protect us from liability, we're going to stop making vaccines. So you should all feel better that the DTaP performed better than the DTP vaccine. Must be safe. PCV13 trialed against the PCV7, the last vaccine. Let's just look at Hep B just for a second. This is given to a day 1 old baby. And this is in their own insert. Again, I'm not making this up. People say, where do you get this information? It's wrapped around the vaccine. They have to warn you about this. It's your doctor that's not letting you read it. In 3 clinical studies, 434 total doses of Recombavax HB of 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age. Not all day 1 old babies, by the way, which is when they're getting it, 10-year-olds who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. 5 days. So if on day 6 a child dies, wasn't caused by the vaccine, our trials didn't see that. Or how about if it causes autoimmune disease? Hep B is the one being blamed for lupus and multiple sclerosis and diabetes. All things that take years to develop, but no trial. If they'd have done a trial as long as Enbrel, we would know. You'd be able to say whether or not the vaccine caused it, but not in 5 days. We have a lawsuit right now against the FDA and both makers of hepatitis B because we finally put in a FOIA request to FDA and CDC saying we want to see a trial that lasted longer than 7 days of the hepatitis B vaccine prior to licensure. Please provide it. You know what they spent a year with their argument was? We don't understand what you mean by longer than 7 days. I swear to God. We went to court several times. The judge is like, I don't understand what your problem is. Like, it's 7 days. Well, we just don't know. What do you mean longer than 7 days? Meaning any trial on this planet that poked the kid with a hep vaccine longer than watched them for longer than 7 days. Give us that trial. We don't understand. We don't really catalog it that way. It went on forever. Finally, they admitted, all right, you got us. No, we've never had a trial longer than 7 days, and we are now trying to get it pulled from the childhood schedule because that can't be acceptable to anyone on this planet. All right, the godfather of the vaccine program, Stanley Plotkin. For those of you that don't know, this guy is on the board of almost every vaccine maker in the world. He's been a part of almost every vaccine. He's certainly been a part of putting every vaccine on your childhood schedule. He's so important that the most important book on vaccines, if you're into vaccines, is called Plotkin on Vaccines. And when you go to the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices meeting, I was actually at this meeting. We started storming these things, and we just turned it into a circus. It was a blast. But they now use the gavel that starts the meeting is now called the Plotkin gavel. You can see Plotkin on Vaccines. He co-writes with Paul Offit, Catherine Edwards, Stanley Plotkin, and Walter Orenstein. All, I think, Judy's golfing buddies, if I remember correctly. She loves these guys, and Catherine. All right. This is what he has to say about vaccine trials and safety.
It is my great honor to use the Stanley Plotkin gavel to open this meeting.
It's our good friend and colleague, Dr. Stan Plotkin.
Dr. Plotkin. Virtually every country in the world is affected by his vaccines.
He was involved in pivotal trials on anthrax, oral polio, rabies vaccine,
rubella vaccine, the rotavirus vaccine, rabies.
He has earned the Distinguished Physician Award of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the Finland Award of the National Foundation for Infectious Diseases, the Hilleman Award of the American Society for Microbiology, the French Legion of Honor, and the Bruce Medal in Preventive Medicine.
He's a member of the Institute of Medicine and the French Academy of Medicine.
One of the very special things about him is the global impact that he's had, not just from the products, but from his book,
He developed the standard textbook for vaccines in 1988.
Bill Gates calls his book a Bible for vaccinologists.
I hope you all have indeed have read the book, and I hope it's more accurate than the Bible.
He trained just a generation of scientists, including myself, to think like he thinks.
Dr. Plotkin, earlier you testified that there are 2 Hep B vaccines in the market, one by Glaxo, GSK, that's Engerix B, and the other one is by Merck, Recombavax HB, right?
Yes.
This is the product, the manufacturer insert for Recombavax HB, correct?
Yes.
And the clinical trial experience would be found in section 6.1, correct? Correct? Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. In section 6.1, when you look at the clinical trials that were done pre-licensure for Recombavax HB, how long does it say that safety was monitored after each dose?
Let's see. Uh, 5 days.
Is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 5 days?
No.
Is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days?
No.
There is no control group, correct?
It does not mention any control group, no.
No. If you turn to section 6.2, under immune system disorders, does it say that there were reports of hypersensitive reactions, including anaphylactoid reactions, bronchospasms, and urticaria having been reported within the first few hours after vaccination?
Yes.
Have there been reports of hypersensitivity syndrome?
Yes, that's what it states.
Reports of arthritis?
It is mentioned.
Okay. It also reports autoimmune diseases, including systemic lupus, erythematosus, lupus-like syndrome, vasculitis, and polyarteritis nodosa as well, correct?
Yes, that's what it states.
And also it states that under the nervous system disorders, it states that there have been reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome, correct?
Yes.
As well as multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, seizure, febrile seizure, peripheral neuropathy, including Bell's palsy, radiculopathy. Thank you very much. Muscle weakness, hypothesia, and encephalitis, correct?
Correct.
These are events that are reported after vaccination, and as we've just discussed, in order to establish whether it's causal between the vaccine and the condition, you need a randomized, placebo-controlled study. But
yes.
That was not done for this hepatitis B vaccine before licensure, was it?
No.
Okay. And given that the vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, isn't it true that it would now be considered unethical to conduct such a study today?
It would be, yes, it would be ethically difficult.
All right. There's a lot to that, but he just explained how the entire scam works. They do a 5-day safety trial. The only way to establish causation, realistically, there's maybe very complicated ways after that, but realistically, the only way, when you hear this idea, when someone says, well, I know someone that says the vaccine caused autism, or I know someone that said the vaccine caused Tourette's or ADD, ADHD, science will say that's correlation, not causation. And you take that to mean, well, they weren't able to prove causation. No, they skipped the only trial you can do to prove causation. Unless you have a placebo group, which is your baseline safety, and you compare the product to it, and you follow them over a period of time, and then you ask, this is how a double-blind study works, at the end of 6 years with Enbrel, They asked questions like, who had more cancer? Who had more diabetes? Who had more lupus? Who had more Tourette's or autism? And then you unblind it, and we look at the numbers and say, well, as it turns out, hopefully, there was the same amount of autism in the vaccinated group as the unvaccinated group. Or if there's more cancer in the drug group, then it's not safe and it doesn't get passed. Correlated. Correlated meaning we had a large group we know didn't get it, and a large group that did, and we had more of a problem in this group than in the one that didn't get it. Makes sense, right? They have skipped that on every single vaccine ever made. Never did it. And here's what's amazing. As soon as they get the FDA and the CDC to approve it to be on the schedule, once it's approved and said it can be on the market, you can never do that study again. Because now they say it's unethical to do that study. This is how this works. This is what they did with the emergency use authorization on COVID. As soon as it got an EUA, meaning everyone in the world can now try this vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna said to the FDA, it's really not ethical to force these people to not be able to take it that are in the placebo group when everyone else is allowed to get it. You're denying them access to something everyone else can get. It's not ethical, and they vaccinated our entire placebo group. So the whole purpose of us asking for a saline placebo disappeared about 2 weeks after the second shot when they went and got the emergency use authorization and they vaccinated our placebo group. So now we'll never ever have causation actually for all the heart swelling, all the heart attacks, all the died suddenly, all of the Alzheimer's, all of the things, all this, the turbo cancers. They'll say correlation, not causation, because you erased the effing study. This is how the entire game has been played. And it allows them to say, we don't have any science that shows there's a connection. All right. In our investigations with ICANN, we looked at every single childhood vaccine, and except for a tiny little group in the HPV trials, about 300 of them, which I'm not going to get in the weeds, they disappeared because clearly they did a lot better than those that were in the vaccine group. So they just sort of erase it in the middle of the study. Not a single childhood vaccine ever saw a placebo group, ever. Meaning, the COVID vaccine that everyone says, well, that's the anomaly. The COVID vaccine is actually the best tested vaccine we've ever seen. Believe it or not, warp speed and the 2 weeks of a placebo group that lasted after the second shot was more than any childhood vaccine has ever gotten. All right. So we don't do any pre-licensure safety trials. We don't establish if there's a safety issue at all. So now all we're left with is post-marketing, post-licensure safety. Everyone get that concept? Studies after the vaccine's already been given to everybody. All right? So how does that go? Let's take a look at this. I'm going to look at, we've all heard this, all claimed harms are thoroughly studied. We've studied it like crazy. Rest assured, what is the biggest one they say? Vaccines do not cause, boom. That's the biggest one. So I'll forget about all the other issues for a second. Let's talk about the one that they are the most sensitive about because they've probably done the most studies there, right? Stands to reason. Okay. Vaccines do not cause autism. This is what's amazing. They're so sensitive about it that when you get that little, vaccine safety sheet when you vaccinate your kid, usually afterwards, that's your informed consent. They're like sticking your baby's going, ah! Like they died, brain is swelling in their head. Then they hand you your informed consent. Here, take this home with you. You didn't even see it before. Doesn't matter. All it says is they might be screaming their head off for a little while. There might be some swelling in the arm. But if you want to see, if there's any other questions you have, like on other serious issues, go to this website. When you go to that website at the bottom of the sheet, this is the first thing that comes up. Very first thing. You didn't ask anything. You're just like, I just want to know about the other side effects. They go out of the way to let you know, one thing for sure, vaccines do not cause autism. Weird. I didn't even ask that. But okay, good to know. Moving on. And this is how it appears in the news.
You can never really say MMR doesn't cause autism, but frankly, when you get in front of the media, you better get used to saying it, because otherwise people hear a door being left open when a door shouldn't be left open.
Sorry, Paul. Man, that one hurts. I know. It stings. He's up there being cool with all of his other lying doctors that love lying to the media. They're all in on it, but there it goes. You got to say it. You got to say vaccines don't cause autism, because if you actually allow the question to be asked or even look like you're faltering, the whole thing falls apart. Okay?
You can never.
So, depending on the study you look at, between 40 to 70% of autism parents blame vaccines for their child's autism. So I want you to think about this. I always think about things like a legal case, right? So about 40 to 70% of the people who have an autistic child, millions of them in the world now, all point to one culprit. It happened right after my child got vaccinated. So the medical establishment comes in. They say, no, couldn't possibly be, and they take vaccines out of the lineup. Ruin your kid's life. Who did it? Who did it here? It's definitely that one, vaccines. That was it. Yeah, me too. Vaccines. Take it out of the lineup, and they say, no, it's genetic. It's genetics are causing it. Really? We've gone from 1 in 10,000 in like the 1960s to now 1 in 34 children, 1 in 22 boys, and that was genetic. I mean, you don't have to be a geneticist, folks. Genes don't cause epidemics. Genes don't change that fast. There's absolutely no way to explain that rise other than environmental impact. And so while they have said we're going to prove it's genes, and while since the 2000 vax was all about a cover-up in 2000 around the MMR vaccine trials and a study done at the CDC, from that moment on, they have never been able to prove it's genetic. But they've never put the eyewitness account back in the lineup. And they'll say, well, there's really, no signals. What are you talking about? An eyewitness account of a crime is the best evidence you have. And in this case, our best evidence isn't being allowed into the room. All right. So this is, the National Institutes of Health was being used. This is sort of our private agency of the best scientists and doctors in the world outside of government. And every once in a while, our CDC or the FDA will task them with a job. Will you guys look into a problem we're looking at? In this case, this was after the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. They wanted a review of pertussis vaccines and related illnesses. Not later than 3 years after the effective date of this title, the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall complete a review of all relevant medical and scientific information, including information obtained from the studies required under subsection E on the nature, circumstances, and extent of the relationship, if any, between vaccines containing pertussis, including host cell extracts and specific antigens, and the following illnesses and conditions. Now, remember what I said. This is the 1986 Act. It's just been passed. It was passed because the pharmaceutical industry is saying we're losing so much money from death and injury from our vaccines, we can't make a profit. This is the world's worst product. But if you want us to keep making it, you're going to have to protect us from liability. So the government is here saying, okay, if we're going to, keep a pertussis product on the market that we know is killing people, we've got to answer certain questions. Here are the top, 11 issues being cited to be caused by these pertussis vaccines. Autism is number 9. So they're supposed to look into it. You have 3 years. It's 1986. So by 1989, we should know, does the pertussis vaccine cause these issues? So 1991 comes along, and the National Institute of Health is brought in to look at all of these issues again and to see, did you do your research? And so they look at all the science around the world, and they're looking at, in 1991, the DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccines. There's 22 of the most common issues that parents are complaining about. Those eyewitnesses' accounts. 22 conditions. And so they ended up looking at all the literature from around the world, all the science, and they said, out of the 22, 6 of them, we found science that shows that the vaccine can cause it. But 12 of the 22, no science exists. We don't know. We can't say yes or no because no one's doing the science. And that included aseptic meningitis, chronic neurologic damage, learning disabilities, and attention deficit disorder, ADD. Parents were complaining, I think the vaccine's causing ADD, but no science has been done on this, so they don't know. Hemolytic anemia, juvenile diabetes, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is paralysis, erythema multiforme, it goes on and on. All right, 1991. So clearly, in 1986, we didn't look at all the issues with DTP because 12 of them haven't been looked at all. Now it's 1994. They get brought in again, and they're asked, now there's 54 common issues being caused by all these vaccines, DT, MM, Hep B, and Hib. Of the 54 conditions, the eyewitness accounts are saying 12 of them, we found the studies that prove that the vaccine causes it. 4 of them, vaccine definitely doesn't cause it. But 38 of 54, no studies exist. So we're getting all these complaints. We're telling you there's mountains of evidence. We're looking at it. We're looking at the science. But the truth is no one's doing the science. No one cares. 2011, look at this. Now we're up to 155 conditions the eyewitnesses are saying is happening to their kids. We're looking at varicella, tetanus, Hep B, MMR. Of 155 conditions, 16 the science exists to show that it is caused by the vaccine. 5 of the conditions the science shows it's not caused by the vaccine. But of 155 conditions, 134 of them, no science exists anywhere on the planet. The National Institute of Health ends up rebuking them every time. They're saying, you got to do better vaccine research here. I mean, we are promoting this product, and you aren't doing any of the science you're telling the world that you're doing. This is particularly awesome. In that 2011 report, they look at the vaccines. Do vaccines cause autism? Does the DTP or the DTaP cause autism? And when they looked at all of the science in the world, now remember, all the way back in 1986, they were tasked, they had 3 years to look at autism. Number 9, does the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine in any form cause autism? It's now 2011, and the conclusion is the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria, tetanus, or acellular pertussis containing vaccines and autism. No science exists. Well, actually wrong. Up on top, there's one study, the Geyer and Geyer study, which showed a relationship between the pertussis vaccine and autism, but they threw it out because it uses their own VAERS system, and they don't trust the VAERS system. Literally. And here's what's amazing. When you get that little vaccine safety sheet and you go to the website and it says vaccines do not cause autism, you know what their evidence of that is? This study right here that looked at pertussis and said, we have no studies, we cannot tell you whether it does or not cause autism. That is what they cite as the explanation for the statement at the top of their website, vaccines do not cause autism. A study that never, ever happened. You can't make this stuff up. All right. What does Stanley Plotkin have to say about all this?
This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and Tdap cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccine and autism.
If you don't know whether DTaP or Tdap cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, Tdap does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim.
Absolutely.
I'll show you how much he regrets having been on the stand for that deposition. It was amazing. We did a FOIA request with his name in Plotkin's and Infuse, and this email popped up. We got about a year later, and he said, I had a very traumatic experience with a lawyer today. It's pretty awesome. And he literally said in the email, there's a new problem. There's a lawyer out there that's asking questions I don't think we are designed to answer. We're going to have to work on this. So he's been working on it for a few years. All right. So post-licensure, you don't really have any safety studies going on. No pre-licensure. They've never looked at DTaP, even though they were asked to in 1986. All these years, they could have looked at that, still have not. And it's all based on this immunity. 1986, there were 3 routine childhood vaccines, DTP, MMR, and OPV. The remaining manufacturer of DTP estimated that its potential tort liability exceeds its annual sales by a factor of 200. This is why we passed the liability protection. That's how bad this product was. It was that bad. 200 times the amount we're losing than we're making from this crappy product. Litigation costs associated with claims of damage from vaccines had forced several companies to stop producing already licensed vaccines. That was the reality. All right? All right. I'm going to try and explain this. I'm getting better at it. It's a little like, so stay with me here for a second. The government takes on all the liability in 1986 for all the vaccine program. They know that DTP is killing kids and paralyzing kids and causing more harm than they know what to do with. They think the rest of the vaccine program's okay, but honestly, they don't know. But now it's their problem. Now you're never going to be able to sue the manufacturer again. You're never going to sue a doctor or a hospital or a Walmart or a gymnasium or whatever street corner they're pulling up into to give you a vaccine. Total liability protection. Now the fault is going to go on the government. They're like, okay. But a little problem happens. At first, vaccine court, which is what this is now, it's a pseudo court. There's no judge, special master, no jury, no press isn't allowed in there. There's no precedence. You can't say there's another case just like mine. I can prove it by precedence. I win. None of that's allowed in this courtroom. But as it turns out, by about 2007, there was 5,600 families all saying their child's autism started after the vaccination. So now our government, by the way, was paying out, up until that moment, about $5 million per case of autism caused by vaccinations. Anyone got a calculator? 5,600 families times 5 million is what our government was staring at. That was the liability. More money than this system had in it. This was going to bankrupt our health department. It was going to bankrupt the entire system. So you're the head of the government. What do you do? How are we going to handle this? Obviously, and by the way, this is the same time period that they're doing the fraudulent study at the CDC, which is the heart of Vaxxed. We've got to figure out how to not have to pay for autism. So they have the omnibus proceeding. They decide to take 5 or 6 cases. There's an argument on how many exactly. They're going to take 5 cases out of the 5,600 families, and they're going to run them through their court system. And however the results come out on those 5 cases will decide the fate of every other one of the 5,600 cases. This is how this went down. And so case number 1, Michelle Cedillo comes along. Severe autism. Mother thinks it was caused by the vaccine. They bring in the top expert in the world, Andrew Zimmerman. Andrew Zimmerman is the greatest specialist of autism. He looks at the case, he gets on the stand, and he says, essentially, there's no mechanism by which Michelle Cedillo's autism was caused by vaccinations. Case loses. 1 down, 4 to go. Number 2, Hannah Poling comes up. Hannah Poling, father claims that she got autism right after the vaccination. One problem here. John Poling, her father, is a neurologist who works in the same hospital as Andrew Zimmerman. He immediately rushes over after watching his daughter regress into autism and says, Andrew, take a look at my daughter. I didn't believe it either. Andrew Zimmerman studies her, and recognizes and says, I have figured it out. At least with your daughter, and it must be many others, she has a mitochondrial disorder. So the energy of her cells isn't firing well enough. So when she got vaccinated, by the way, a vaccine is designed to cause inflammation. That's it. It's supposed to make you, in fact, make you sick. But the problem is if you get inflammation and you don't have good mitochondria fighting it, holding it back, containing it, it goes in your brain swells. I had a mother explain it really well to me about a year ago. She said, Del, vaccines didn't cause my child's autism. Vaccine caused encephalopathy, the swelling of my child's brain. And when his brain finally got back to normal size, he forever had a symptom called autism. He could have had Tourette's, probably could have had schizophrenia, or God knows how many other things. Maybe it's just little brain swellings that cause ADD, ADHD, or, all of these issues that are neurologic. We don't know because no one's studying it. But what Andrew Zimmerman recognizes is that if you don't have a strong mitochondrial system, you have a disorder, then your body can't fight the vaccine inflammation. Her brain swelled and she got autism. He goes into the courtroom, goes to the judge and goes to the prosecution and says, actually the defense, he's working for the state, and he said, I'm going to testify today that the vaccine actually does cause autism in this case. It's a mitochondrial disorder. And they sent him home, never to be heard from again. He was fired on the spot. Government fired him. We got with him with our nonprofit and Aaron years later, I think this is just maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think I see the date on here. And here's the problem. That after they fired him, they took Hannah Polling's case and they removed it from the omnibus proceeding because they knew they were going to lose, so they didn't stick to their own rules. They put that one out and settled it out of court, and they moved on to the next case. And in that case, at the end, they said, Dr. Andrew Zimmerman couldn't be here today, but he's the world's leading authority on autism, and he has said unequivocally there's no mechanism by which a vaccine causes autism. And every case after that lost, and autism was never able to win inside of the vaccine court system again. So we had him put this affidavit out to the Department of Justice. I'm a board-certified pediatric neurologist and former director of medical research, Center for Autism and Related Disorders, Kennedy Krieger Institute. In 2007, I was an expert witness for the Department of Health and Human Services in the omnibus autism proceeding under National Childhood Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. I clarified that my written expert opinion regarding Michelle Cedillo was a case-specific opinion as to Michelle Cedillo. My written expert opinion regarding Michelle Cedillo was not intended to be a blanket statement as to all children in all medical science. I explained that I was of the opinion that there were exceptions in which vaccinations could cause autism. More specifically, I explained that in a subset of children with an underlying mitochondrial dysfunction, vaccine-induced fever and immune stimulation that exceeded metabolic energy reserves could, and at least one of my patients did cause regressive encephalopathy with features of autism spectrum disorder. Shortly after I clarified my opinions with the DOJ attorneys, I was contacted by one of the junior DOJ attorneys informed that I would no longer be needed as an expert witness on behalf of Health and Human Services. In my opinion, it was highly misleading for the Department of Justice to continue to use my original written expert opinion as to Michelle Cedillo as evidence against the remaining petitioners in the OAP omnibus autism proceeding in light of the above referenced information, which I explained to the DOJ attorneys while omitting the caveat regarding exceptions in which vaccinations could cause autism. You have been told that they have done the science, but the only scientist the state ever had told him he found the evidence. They kicked it out of the court and lied to the world. And remember Sanjay Gupta? I hope you don't still love that guy because I'm about to crush your spirit right now. Because right now he's saying, we don't know what causes autism, but we know it doesn't. He forgot, I guess, that he did this interview.
Some parents of autistic children blame childhood vaccines. You may remember 9-year-old Hannah Poling. Recently, the government's so-called vaccine court conceded her family's claim that vaccines may have helped trigger Hannah's autism. Our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, is back with more on that debate on this Autism Awareness Day. Sanjay?
Don, thank you. We are here with Dr. John Poling. He is, first of all, he's a neurologist. He's also the father of Hannah Poling, as you just mentioned. Her case of autism diagnosis was conceded by the federal government as having been contributed to by vaccines. That was a pretty startling thing, I think, for a lot of people to hear. We talked to a lot of experts about this. They say, look, vaccines in no way cause autism. You're a neurologist. You're also the father of Hannah. What do you say?
Well, I think you bring up a really important point, is that the government, actually the Department of Health and Human Services, conceded that my daughter's medical problems, which are autism, encephalopathy, seizures, were brought on by vaccination. You know,
that's startling, I think, for a lot of people to hear that, because we've been taught for so long. You're a doctor, I'm a doctor. We go to medical school, we hear this, vaccines, obviously. There's so many good things about vaccines. They prevent, life-threatening illnesses that we've heard about. But in your daughter's case, it turned out to be a problem.
I wouldn't have believed it till it happened to me. To be honest with you, as a doctor, until it happened to me, until I saw the regression, until I saw a normal 18-month-old toddler descend into autism, I wouldn't have believed it was possible.
The experts that I've talked to, including the head of the director of the CDC, Dr. Julie Gerberding, says that was a rare case. That is not likely to be the norm, or even that's likely to be an exception. What do you say to that?
Well, I think a lot of the media outlets have put out a statement that says rare underlying genetic mitochondrial disease. Now, that's 5 words. 4 of those are not accurate in the sense that we know now, we didn't know back in 2001 that mitochondrial dysfunction is rare, actually not rare. 2, we don't know if it was underlying or if it was something that developed later, although certainly there's some genetic underpinnings to it. And the only word correct is mitochondrial, and the difference between disease and dysfunction, which we talked about.
Right. So what you believe is that did Hannah have some sort of predisposition, and then the vaccines tipped her over the edge into developing autism? What is your belief now?
Well, I don't think that vaccines are the only way that you can tip over a child like Hannah to regress and have an encephalopathy and have regress into autism. There are probably multiple triggers. In my daughter, clearly it was the vaccinations. That was our experience. As far as other families' experiences, it may be different. The other cases that were at Johns Hopkins, there were only a few like Hannah, and then others regressed for other reasons. It's not really a known entity.
I think the thing that a lot of parents, and I have to tell you, as a doctor, now as a parent too, as you know, I have 2 daughters, so I have a 2.5-year-old and a 13-month-old. What does that mean for me, John? I mean, because, I think they're perfectly normal. I mean, they seem to me to be, and they're delightful, and I plan on getting them vaccinated. I got my 2.5-year-old vaccinated on time. What advice would you have now, having gone through what you've gone through?
Well, first and foremost, I am pro-vaccine. I'm in favor of safe vaccination. I'm the last person that wants to see measles or polio come back. I had one of the only cases last year of West Nile-induced polio here in Georgia, and it's devastating. I think what a parent needs to do now is talk with their pediatrician, and pediatricians need to actually have a grassroots movement amongst the pediatricians and the AAP to develop safe vaccine schedules for each individual patient. I mean, you and I are physicians, and we took an oath to our individual patient. We didn't take an oath for the public health or the greater good. So each pediatrician has to focus on that.
All right. Well, Dr. John Poling, you're going to be joining us a lot throughout the day today. I appreciate this. This is an issue we're going to keep on, as you know. And Don and Brianna, we're investigating this all day long, obviously. Toss it back to you now. We'll keep talking. Thanks.
So there it is. I mean, just think about Sanjay. He sits on your television now, having done that interview. Nothing's ever happened in the science since then. He's never seen anything else. He did an interview. The state said the vaccine caused the autism. And they'll like to say to you, well, that's just a rare case. Autism was rare. So how were you ever, what does rare mean? We don't study it. We don't talk about it. This is the biggest problem. All of us in the vaccine risk awareness movement, I'm not trying to eradicate vaccines. If you want to inject yourself with viruses and bacteria and mercury and aluminum and formaldehyde, go right ahead. It's a free country. But don't make me do it. But honestly, be honest with everybody else out there what these things actually do. If you have 1 case, then you have 10 cases. You have 100 cases. And by the way, those 5,600 cases all got robbed because of a lie by the U.S. government. Elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, over and over and over again, keep poisoning your kids with MMR, with DTaP, causing your children to have pertussis the rest of their lives, and they know it. Oh, I was going to go, let me just hit back. Basically, every study we've ever looked at, I'm sure Judy has seen the same thing. This was a study of homeschoolers. I will tell you, I've challenged large medical establishments. I'll bet you can't do this study and not see it. And they do the study. They promised they would publish it. They don't. But they all say the same thing. No matter what you look at, it's basically like this. If you compare vaccinated to unvaccinated, 30 times the amount of rhinitis in the vaccinated, 3.9 times the amount of allergies, 4 times the amount of ADHD, 4 times the amount of autism, 3 times the amount of eczema, 5 times the amount of learning disabilities, and 3.7 times the amount of neurological disorders in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. Bobby Kennedy and I had the opportunity back in 2017 when Donald Trump first came into office to go. Donald Trump set up a meeting for us to go meet at the NIH with Tony Fauci, Francis Collins, and all of the heads of their vaccine department in autism to lay out the case. I was really happy. Bobby was the one invited. He said, Del, you guys have done a lot of research. Aaron Siri and I and several specialists, I think Judy weighed in. We all put in all the evidence we had and carried it into the NIH. And while we're there, we had 2 questions, really. It all boiled down to, we can't find a single double-blind placebo trial done on any of the vaccines. Do they exist, or are you skipping them? After some hemming and hawing, they had to admit that they don't do them because it's unethical, and I've already proved that to you. And then we said, well, why don't you just then, because they said it's unethical to have a placebo group that doesn't get these great products. We said, great. Why don't you do a retrospective study? No ethical problem. The VSD, Vaccine Safety Data Link, is a database that has 10 million people's records from the United States of America, tens of thousands of unvaccinated people in it. Just do a comparative study. Think about this. We're the home of Apple and Microsoft, and we got AI now, if you want to get into that. Computer learning, all you have to do is take that system and ask simple questions. Here's the vaccinated group. Here's the unvaccinated group. Who has more cancer? Who has more diabetes? Who has more lupus? Who has more ADHD? Who has more autism? Why don't you do that study? You know what they said to us? We can't figure out a way to do that study. That's what Francis Collins and Tony Fauci, there's just no way to do that study. What do you mean? There's no way to compare 2 groups of people? You do that for every drug we take. They said we will never do that study. So think about this. And people say, Del, you keep challenging the CDC to do the study. Don't do that. They're going to fake that study. They're going to put out they're going to mess it up somehow. I guarantee you, if they could, they would have. Mark my word. Trust me, between you and I, the situation in the world today, the anti-vaxxers are clearly winning. We are kicking their ass. All right? We're growing exponentially every single day. You need to shut me up. You need to shut up Judy. You got to shut up Mickey Willis and Bobby Kennedy and everybody else, Sherry Tenpenny. All you have to do is a comparative study of any large database and say, look, the vaccinated live longer, have less cancer, less autism. There's the proof. You don't think they would do that study if they thought it would work? Let me ask you another question. Do you really think they haven't done that study and have no idea whether or not it would work? They have done that study every way sideways. They probably do it 5 times a week. Try this, try that. I don't know, get rid of those people. I don't know, give them some rabbit's blood. Try something. Nothing can get them a result in a large database study to prove to you vaccines make you healthier. I should rest my case right there. That's just common sense. All right, I'll try to get this moving along. But I want to win this case. All right, this is the entire, this is the CDC schedule, especially for the first 6 months of life. So we decided at our nonprofit, if vaccines, plural, do not cause autism, meaning none of them do, then how about let's take the MMR out, because there's a lot of baloney studies, and we don't want to get into that. And we don't want to get into the thimerosal, so we'll leave all the old ones alone. We said to the CDC, please provide us with any studies you have that show that the first 6 vaccines in the first 6 months of life do not cause autism. You have mountains of evidence to show us the first 6 vaccines, since usually now you're saying you can diagnose autism in about 6 to 8 months. They're getting really good at it. So clearly, if vaccines can cause it, it would happen in one of those first 6 vaccines. We spent about 1.5 years on that. They kept pushing back, saying, we don't know what you're asking for. Judge finally said, I think it's pretty clear what they're asking for. We asked for these: DTaP, Engerix-B, Recombavax, Prevnar 13, HIV vaccines, IPV. Copies of the studies the CDC relies upon to claim that the cumulative exposure vaccines it recommends that babies be administered during the first 6 months of life do not cause autism. They came back to us finally after 1 year, and this has been the genius. Let me just let you in a little secret, because the cat's out of the bag. You know what we did that no one ever thought of doing? Aaron Siri and I got together and said, how are we going to get to the truth? And said, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, is designed, it's basically the government or our employers. I can ask for your emails. You work for me. I can ask for any information you have. But Aaron said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to ask for things that they say they have that we know they don't. No one had ever done it. At first, they're like, what do you mean? You want studies that, show that the first 6 months of vaccines don't cause that? We don't know what you're talking about. No, just what studies do you have? Because you say they don't cause autism. What are you looking at? Show us that. They came back. They gave us 20 studies. 18 of them were thimerosal and MMR, all after 6 months. That wasn't our request. We said the first 6 months of life. They had one involving an antigen, which had nothing to do with the vaccine. And in that study, they said this cannot be used to determine whether vaccines cause autism or not. This is an antigen study. And then they pointed to the only study, guess which one? The one that the Institute of Medicine looked at that said we cannot confirm nor deny whether or not DTaP causes autism. So that was the only one we had that met our criteria. They had 0. And so that was our genius. You're telling the world there's mountains of evidence. We're going to ask for that evidence, and when you refuse to give it to us, we're taking you to court, so that when you finally have to admit it, we have a judge signing the bottom of that order, and you will never get away with saying it in a courtroom ever again. And we've busted their balls like that time after time after time. Remember, I told you that the case right after right after Hannah Poling came up, that was this case. And this case finally just came around again. Yates Hazelhurst was a young boy. He had the same mitochondrial issue, all of it. His case was thrown out of court based on the lie they said about Andrew Zimmerman. A couple of years ago, Children's Health Defense and the Informed Consent Action Network both came together to fund this case. We tried to take another approach, going after the pediatrician that gave Yates the vaccination. This is Catherine Edwards, one of the other writers on Plotkin on vaccines. This is her being deposed by Aaron Siri. She came into this case to say none of the vaccines cause autism. This is awesome.
According to your profile, you have done most of the pivotal trials relied upon to license many of the vaccines, correct, on the market?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're highly experienced at conducting clinical trials, correct?
I'm highly experienced conducting clinical trials.
And you're familiar with many of the clinical trials that relied upon to license many of the vaccines currently on the market, correct?
I am.
In your opinion, did the clinical trials relied upon to license the vaccines that Yates received, many of which are still on the market today, were they designed to rule out that the vaccine causes autism?
No. You've badgered me into answering the question the way you want me to, but I think that that's probably the answer.
Is that your accurate and truthful testimony?
Yes.
In the expert disclosures for this case, it asserts that, among other things, you will testify that, quote, the issue of whether vaccines cause autism has been thoroughly researched and rejected, end quote. It's your testimony that MMR vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that Hep B vaccine cannot cause autism.
That's correct.
It's your testimony that iPol cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that HIV vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
Your testimony that varicella vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
It's your testimony that Prevnar vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And it's your testimony that DTaP vaccine cannot cause autism.
Yes.
And do you have a study that supports that DTaP doesn't cause autism?
I do not have a study that DTaP causes autism. So I don't have either.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether iPol causes autism?
No, I do not, sir.
Do you have any study one way or another of whether NGRX-B causes autism?
I do not have any evidence that it causes autism, nor that it does not.
And what about Hib titers vaccine? Any evidence one way or another of whether it causes autism?
No.
What about Prevnar vaccine? Any evidence one way or another?
No, sir. No, sir.
And how about varicella vaccine? Let me just finish. Are there any studies one way or another that support whether it does or doesn't cause autism?
Part of MMR, but not as varicella by itself. No, sir. No studies that say it does, or no studies that say it doesn't.
There have been studies that have found an association between hepatitis B vaccine and autism, correct?
Not studies that I feel are credible.
Okay. Which study are you referring to when you say that?
Well, why don't you show me the study and then I'll see whether I agree with it.
This woman literally is the second biggest vaccine expert in the world. She co-wrote the biggest vaccine book in the world. She is here to make one point as testimony that none of the vaccines this kid got cause autism, okay? So can we all agree, if any science exists on this planet, when they say mountains of science, this is the one thing we have definitely looked at, this woman would know it exists, right? She'd be able to point to it, right? I mean, this is the one job she's there for, is to show her evidence, and she has absolutely none. There's none. Folks, there's none. It's zero. There is zero science around vaccines and autism done in the entire world. It is the biggest lie ever told. It is destroying our children. We are getting this close to not be able to mount a standing army because so many children have autism. We are about to not be able to mount a standing Starbucks, and we're still letting media lie to us on this issue every single day. If you look at all the science, the only things that have ever been studied in relating to autism is a couple of studies on the MMR vaccine and on one ingredient, thimerosal. The rest of this, never looked at, and those studies are fraudulent. If you watch the High Wire, I've gone through how they do those fraudulent studies. Why does this matter? Because I have done too many interviews like this.
Hi, how you doing? We have triplets, 2 boys and a girl, Richie, Robbie, and Claire. Every day in our life was a party. Every single day they were smiling and laughing and looking at each other, engaging in each other. On June 25th, 2007, we brought them in for the pneumococcal shot. My daughter still has the mark on her leg from the shot. She was the first one to get it, and she screamed and never really stopped screaming after that. But we continued. We didn't know. We did the boys as well. By noon, Claire shut completely off. It was as if she was blind and deaf, and all she did at that moment was stare at the ceiling fan. So that was at noon. We had the shot at 10 a.m. 2 o'clock, we watched Richie shut off. They lost all their reflexes. I'm an educational audiologist. I actually did the test for the stapedial reflex, which is a little muscle in the middle ear, just to see if a muscle they can't control was still working, and it didn't. The stapedial reflex dampens sound, so your ears don't hurt from a really loud sound, and both of them had no stapedial reflex. They stopped blinking, stopped yawning, stopped coughing, stopped sneezing.
The worst is when we saw the final one shut down. We were told it was genetic, and then we were told by geneticists that there's no possible way 3 children would shut off on the same day. So we had severe autism spectrum disorder for all 3 kids entering kindergarten. We have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to recover them. The only person that we got back is Robbie, the one that was last to shut off. Richie can only say single, maybe 2 words together. Claire is still completely nonverbal, not potty trained, and Robbie is approaching grade level, but severe OCD. So.
What do you do? What's your...
Property management. Let me tell you what a day in our life is. So you got, say, a 6 or 7 or 8 year old child who's not potty trained, and at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning they fill their diaper. Well, you assume that's pretty uncomfortable, so they take it off. Pretty soon it's all over them, it's all over the bed. In short order, it's all over me, it's all over her. I'm snapping at her, she's snapping at me. We're both snapping at the kid, who is the only innocent party in the whole scenario. And the one thing that's conspicuously absent from that scenario is anybody who told you that shot was safe. They were all asleep in their bed. They haven't got a problem in the world.
I can't imagine. You have 3 kids, and you're watching one turn off after the next. Can you imagine that moment as you're watching that 3rd child praying to God, please? No. I've already had 3 or 4 of you in this room talk about how you got into this late. Your first child got vaccinated, has all sorts of health issues. Second child has less vaccines, doing much better. 3rd child completely unvaccinated, valedictorian of the class, star of the football team, star of the basketball team. This story is all across this country. Are we out of our minds? Why are we doing this? Why is this still happening? I know I'm out of time. Let me just finish up with the regulators. They're all corrupt. Everyone that decides to put these on the market, study after study shows that they work for the pharmaceutical industry. Paul Offit was literally making a rotavirus vaccine when he was on the ACIP committee deciding whether or not a rotavirus vaccine should be on the childhood schedule. He claims he didn't recuse himself because it wasn't his rotavirus vaccine, but clearly once a rotavirus vaccine was on the schedule, he would make the millions once his was finished, as he did. Didn't recuse himself, totally corrupt. One of the big a-holes in this business. I wish he would debate me. But this is classic. This is a different case. Catherine Edwards, once again, on the stand. This is during a COVID trial. She was one of the big people making sure the COVID vaccine was safe. This should say it all.
And isn't it true that you've also been an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir. I have been an advisor to Pfizer, and I've been working very, very closely with Pfizer, particularly their COVID vaccines, and going over lots of reactions and adverse events. So yes, I am working and being paid by Pfizer for my assessment of vaccine safety.
You're part of the Data Safety Monitoring Board for the Pfizer COVID vaccine. Is that what you meant when you said that? Correct. You're one of the only 5 members of that Data Safety Monitoring Board over the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, right?
Yes, sir, I am.
And that's supposed to be an independent Data Safety Monitoring Board, correct?
It is an independent Data Safety Monitoring Board.
That's the board that all of us in America are hoping on and relying upon is going to independently make sure that safety is properly assessed as the clinical trial for that Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is ongoing, correct?
That's true, and let me tell you that we have worked very hard to go over this and worked very, very hard to do that indeed as comprehensively as we possibly can.
And since it's supposed to be independent, it's critical that the members of that independent data safety monitoring board are in fact independent of the pharmaceutical company whose product is being evaluated, correct?
That's correct.
But isn't it true that directly before becoming a member of the independent data safety monitoring board of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Pfizer pays me to evaluate the safety of their vaccines because I'm an expert. So I do get paid to do the work that I've been doing, but I've been doing the work conscientiously and comprehensively.
My question was, before you became a member of the independent data safety monitoring board for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, isn't it true that you were separately, before you held that independent position, you were an advisor to Pfizer?
Yes, sir, but I think what you're presuming is that because I've been an advisor makes me on their dole or makes me going to say what they want me to say. That is not and has never been a part of my being. I say what I believe based on my expertise.
So you don't think that financial incentives can sway people's judgment at all?
It does not sway my judgment, sir.
Why bother having an independent data safety monitoring board? Why doesn't Pfizer just have some of its employees on it?
Because we are independent.
Meaning folks who were never advisors to Pfizer.
We are independent from Pfizer in this assessment.
Man, we got work to do, folks. We got work to do. These people are in charge. It's why the world looks the way it does. I do want to play you this video because I think it's the most important interview ever done. This is the former head of the NIH, Bernadine Healy. She's being interviewed by Cheryl Atkinson on CBS. The head of the NIH is the top scientist in the world. They have more money to spend on investigations of vaccines or anything than any other regulatory agency or hospital in the world. Billions of dollars. This is what she said in 2008 in this interview.
This is the time when we do have the opportunity to understand whether or not there are susceptible children, perhaps genetically, perhaps they have a metabolic issue, mitochondrial disorder, immunological issue, that makes them more susceptible to vaccines, plural, or to one particular vaccine, or to a component of vaccine, like mercury. So we now, in these times, have to, I think, take another look at that hypothesis, not deny it. And I think we have the tools today that we didn't have 10 years ago, that we didn't have 20 years ago, to try and tease that out and find out if indeed there is that susceptible group. Why is this important? A susceptible group does not mean that vaccines aren't good. What a susceptible group will tell us is that maybe there is a group of individuals or a group of children that shouldn't have a particular vaccine or shouldn't have vaccine on the same schedule. It is the job of the public health community and of physicians to be out there and to say, yes, we can make it safer because we are able to say this is a subset. We're going to deliver it in a way that we think is safer.
Do you feel the government was too quick to dismiss out of hand that there was this possibility of a link between vaccines and autism?
I think the government or certain public health officials in the government have been too quick to dismiss the concerns of these families without studying the population that got sick. I haven't seen major studies that focus on 300 kids who got autistic symptoms within a period of a few weeks of a vaccine. The reason why they didn't want to look for those susceptibility groups was because they're afraid that if they found them, however big or small they were, that would scare the public away. The fact that there is concern that you don't want to know that susceptible group is a real disappointment to me. If you know that susceptible group, you can save those children.
It sounds like you don't think the hypothesis of a link between vaccines and autism is completely irrational.
So when I first heard about it, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me. The more you delve into it, if you look at the basic science, if you look at the research that's been done in animals, if you also look at some of these individual cases, and if you look at the evidence that there is no link, what I come away with is the question has not been answered.
And that's autism. The most highly researched, most sensitive space in vaccines. And there's not a scientist on this planet or a doctor that can show you any evidence that they've done any studies whatsoever. Can you imagine all of our other health issues? The list goes on and on. We've gone from 12% chronic illness, which is a neurological or an autoimmune disease in the 1980s, to now our children, 60% of them are permanently chronically ill. That is the greatest decline ever witnessed in human history. And whatever's causing it, the blame has got to be on the environmental toxins, vaccines being one of them, that have been approved by the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and ultimately Health and Human Services. If you don't think you can believe in doctors or hospitals, imagine the God that they bow down to inside of our regulatory agencies. Every doctor. And this is the hardest part when you talk to people is, you're telling me you know more than my doctor? I'm telling you, yes, that's the truth. It's really unfortunate that that is the case, because they only know what the CDC tells them. And if the CDC's lying to them, then they have got nowhere else to go. We're seeing the whole thing turn on the COVID vaccine. We're now talking about vaccine harms. We're never going to ever hear this stupid statement, vaccines are safe and effective, ever again. Dax Burke's admitting that the vaccine, she knows it was never going to work, didn't ever tell anybody. Robert Redfield saying the same thing on the stand just over a week ago in a congressional hearing. He's saying the same thing, but here it is. I said Stanley Plotkin seemed like he was going to scream, "You can't handle the truth." He just did that 2 weeks ago with this paper. And I want to say this to everyone that has been donating to the High Wire and I Can. This is the battle we've been fighting for you. And imagine every time that you've given us $1, we've been able to put Aaron Siri into these courtrooms where he's absolutely obliterating these scientists and recorded video cameras. This will never go away. We are winning this all the way across the board. And now Aaron Siri has been appearing in hearings, state hearings on COVID, and now in front of the congressional hearings. And so what happens? The health departments and the lobbyists keep going to these politicians and saying, look, you can't listen to these people. And like, great, but they're saying there's no safety trials. That's not true, right? Get us the safety trial. Health department's like, I'll get right on that. They go to their bosses. Where are the safety trials? We have placebo trials, right? Why is no one giving me a placebo trial? Look like an asshole in here. I'm telling politicians they're safe, right? Stanley Plotkin has finally decided to deal with it because we have created such a problem in this country. We have been doing programs like this, and Ben Rawls been being people, and great people like him have been letting me speak, and we've been in courtrooms, and we've been congressional hearings, and I'm on the High Wire every day. And now other, Fox News people are sharing our information, and Tucker Carlson's on board. And this thing is sweeping like a tidal wave. And finally, Stanley Plotkin, on his deathbed 2 weeks ago, funding post-authorization vaccine safety science. Here's what he says. However, the widespread vaccine hesitancy observed during the COVID-19 pandemic suggests that the public is no longer satisfied with the traditional safety goal of simply detecting and quantifying the associated risks after a vaccine has been authorized for use. There it is. He just admitted it. We never did it. And I don't care what anyone tells you, and they can call me spreading misinformation, but I dropped my case here. I am on the record. Stanley Plotkin just admitted it. No safety trials exist, period. Get these things off the market. Start figuring out how to ethically test them, because my kid's not going to touch them. And everyone I meet, I will make sure they know the truth. And I will make sure that every one of you can have this PowerPoint so that you can go and talk to your friends, ask Ben, every video, everything that's here. Post-authorization studies have never been done, but if you would fund us, we could try to do them. No science exists. That is what we have finally won. Don't be down. These are incredible times because the lies have finally come to the forefront. If you want to call it, Satan has been revealed. The darkness is showing itself. The light is showing down, and you are the light. You are the change. You were born for a moment such as this. This is our time. Stop complaining about it. You're needed. You've been chosen to be here right now to save our children, to clean up the corruption of science, and to stand for freedom, meaning your body is yours and your children are yours. Don't ever think you're outnumbered, because never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Tell everyone you know. You should never be afraid of the truth when you have evidence like this.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.